reduction is an evidence-based health policy that seeks to reduce health and social harms that are associated with addiction and substance use, without the expectation that people abstain or stop using drugs. We're here to talk about supervised consumption sites. These are low-barrier health services that provide an environment for people to inject, smoke, snort, or ingest pre-obtained drugs under the supervision of trained staff. In addition to supervised injection, individuals are given access to snacks, harm reduction supplies, injection and smoking equipment and safer sex products, STI testing, education on safer injection and drug use, naloxone kits and training, nursing care including wound care, drug checking services, advocacy and other practical support services, counseling and connections to mental health services, referrals to primary care, detox and drug treatment, and shelter, housing, and income supports.
The Indigenous community is uniquely affected by the opioid crisis that has made the need for supervised consumption sites especially relevant for these populations. Les Harper, an Indigenous service worker at an East End consumption site, says that he estimates that at least half of those seeking services at his clinic are Indigenous, even though they make up less than 3% of the city's residents. Thanks to the history of being over-policed, the Indigenous community has been in a vicious cycle of stigmatized drug use and incarceration. Indigenous in Canada account for 24.4% of the federal prison population, despite being 4.3% of the general population. Once an individual is labeled a felon, it becomes legal to discriminate against them, and as drug use is behavior-based, these factors make it easy for larger communities to criminalize such people and not be seen as racist or prejudiced, but simply trying to maintain order and safety. Ignoring the danger to those most commonly dying of overdoses per capita, and writing off the generational trauma at play causing much of the cycle of addictive behavior, communities are using thinly veiled racism to excuse speaking out against the efficacy of existing supervised consumption sites. Further improvements are required, though. Research shows mainstream approaches don't work well for Indigenous families. It's important to weave Indigenous elders, healing circles, and traditional medicines and teachings into the city's healthcare system. An Indigenous overdose strategy, developed by an independent Indigenous contractor with input from the community and support from Toronto Public Health states, currently, the perception is that the service workers are generally not knowledgeable about Indigenous culture and history and colonialism, including the assimilation and repression of residential schools, the 60s Scoop, and Indian hospitals. The report reads, "This results in spaces in which Indigenous people who use drugs feel judged and like misfits. We can and must do better to protect this segment of our population."
When I found out that there was a supervised consumption site being built in my neighborhood back in 2017, I was outraged. We already had a big drug problem in this community, and I just knew that this would only exacerbate the problem. All I could think of was the children, whose playgrounds would be now littered with even more needles than before. I believed this would make our streets more dangerous. However, after a few years of having a supervised consumption site in our area, I can truly say now that this has only done good in our community. There are actually a lot less needles in the streets now because people are using and disposing their equipment inside the supervised consumption site, rather than outside in playgrounds and alleyways. I know several people in the area who are now seeking treatment as a result of accessing the supervised consumption site. I realize now how misinformed I was. Like so many others, I too believed in the war on drugs, but that's not the answer. The answer is not incarceration, it's not forced sobriety. The answer is having a safe environment where people can go to access clean supplies, an on-site medical professional who can not only test their drugs, but who can actually intervene and save a life in the event of an overdose, and access to treatment should people need it. This is a public health issue, and people are dying. An addiction is not a moral failing. It's treatable, and the decision to access these services is up to the individual. Everyone has been touched by some form of addiction in their lives. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's human connection. And no matter who you are, no matter where you stand on this issue, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We're all important, and we all deserve a chance at life. Access to supervised consumption sites keeps people alive. We ask that you look at this from a place of compassion and empathy. Supervised consumption sites save lives.